Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, or good night, good evening. This is SIG API Machinery bi-weekly meeting for Kubernetes. Today is October 6, 2021. We are in the last quarter of this year. Believe it or not, the time is flying. We have 3 topics today to discuss. So let's begin with that. I will give it to Alexander for the first one, I will open this one and let me know if you want me to follow any links.
Sure. So just quickly, I work for Red Hat, and on this topic, I've already discussed it with Stefan. And the genesis of it is I work in networking, and I wrote a controller not too long ago, essentially. And I realized when writing this controller that you cannot create CRs for a particular CR if the name of the CR doesn't comply to DNS or isn't DNS compliant. So for example, in my case, I had a CR where the name was an IPv6 address, essentially, and it couldn't be created. And spoke to Stefan, and the outcome of that wasn't really, I mean, he raised that PR that I linked to in this case, and we discussed it really shortly. Essentially, didn't see any logical reason as to why CRs should be blocked if they're non-DNS compliant. But for now, we kind of left it at that. I, however, would like to push this rock further down the road, so to speak, and hence why I'm bringing it up in this meeting right now. I don't really know anything about the SIG API and the machinery, so to speak, so I don't really know what constraints there might be which would justify having such a restriction. Hence, I would kind of leave the floor open for discussions for people who are experts in this matter. And see if there's any way that we could either resolve it, because I could obviously change the CRD, so to speak, to work around the issue. But given all of this, I would just like to get everybody's opinion.
So are you wondering, are you interested in more background on why there's a naming constraint, or are we kind of taking that as is this like a hard fixed rule?
So yeah, I would like to understand what the background is, as you mentioned, and also see if the reason why this constraint exists should continue existing, or if we could change that so that users, for example, in the future could create CRs which both have, for example, an IPv6 address or a MAC address or anything that would be non-DNS compliant, so to speak.
I don't know the full background, but just kind of my basic understanding is that we picked a set of rules very early on in Kubernetes on what we're going to be allowed to use to name things, kind of like all programming languages do. And you pick something that is expressive enough that you don't think it's going to be overly constraining, but limited enough that it doesn't cause other problems when you're going to have to use that name in conjunction with other features. So for example, once you pick that naming scheme, then other systems might be able to use that name in certain places in other grammars. So for example, like,
to be clear, we have resources which are less constrained. So it's an intentional choice from the code.
Yes, it is. It was an intentional choice for one that was going to be easy to compose and was also very consistent with the majority of Kubernetes resource names. OpenShift has some that are historically significantly more open. They caused us problems in the past. And Kubernetes has a few that aren't entirely consistent. But we did choose this to be consistent with most of them and to have something that easily composes and can be used as a name in other spots.
Looks like Mo has a hand.
I was just going to mention that you can name your RBAC resources using emoji, and they render out in your CLI and fun little pandas and stuff. Because you can put whatever you want in there. The only requirement is you can't have a slash in it because of etcd rules. That's all.
Yeah, I think some server-side apply tests use some hamburger emojis. I'll say I personally don't know if I super buy the reasoning for why we restricted it so much. But given that we did, the amount of care involved in changing it just seems like I have a hard time believing the benefit is so great that it is worth the effort to make the change safely. The problem is that once we have a rule like this, then literally any implementation anywhere could have taken a dependency on that. And so you don't know what clients might have baked in what rules, right? So like people might see a CR and who knows what they're doing with the name. If you make it more permissive, you could break client logic in very surprising places. So I just, relaxing that and keeping it safe just seems really hard to me. Does that make sense, Alexander?
Yeah, of course. The idea was here just to get a feeling for what the group kind of gravitates towards, and it seems like, yeah, the change is sufficiently impactful to not justify doing it, so to speak. So in this case, I'll probably just modify my CRD to something else.
Yeah, I'm sure you can think of lots of ways of manipulating it so that it obeys the rules.
Is there any
Okay.
way to quantify the impact of the change, or is because of the clients that we don't know, it's almost impossible to actually?
Right. That's what is especially hard about it is we don't know what clients there are and what they've done. Right. Like there could be closed source clients, and the nature of this kind of thing, especially, is that people don't even realize that they've built in a dependency on the particular format. Because usually people aren't thinking about counterexamples to whatever exactly they might be doing with a name. So it's likely that the people who've taken a dependency on this don't even realize they have done so.
And that was also roughly the reasoning for keeping it tight to begin with, was that like people are going to use this in a bunch of spots. What is safe for them to use for a directory and for a host and for whatever else they're going to use it for, because they will never do emojis until someone does.
Yeah.
Can I get somebody of the people that spoke, or maybe Alexander, to capture this in the issue? Because the issue was closed by the robot. We never replied to this. So for posterity, can we capture briefly, the reasoning of this?
I can't do it right now. I'm on holiday and I'm not sitting in front of my laptop, so I couldn't even bring up the PR. You'll excuse me for that. If anybody
yeah.
can, I'd be more than appreciative.
Yeah, I'll write something on it.
Okay, thank you.
Right. I've opened it up, so I'll remember. Yeah, there's lots of things that can be done. Like I think it's mentioned in the thing, you can replace dots with underscores. My favorite technique is hash it and take some of the bytes of the hash. That's not superhuman readable, but it's probably good enough. Depending on what your needs are.
Okay, fair enough. I guess that was everything for me.
Thanks. Sorry, I don't have better news.
No worries, thank you.
Very good. Should we move to the next one? Austin.
Sure. So I was taking a look at OpenAPI support in kind of all of Go and didn't really find much support outside of Kubernetes. So I tried to use kube-openapi in a project that I'm working on, but noticed that it's pretty tightly coupled to Go RESTful and a pretty old version of Go RESTful at that. So I'm wondering if there's a possibility that we can hide this dependency. The work in progress that I've got right now uses like a simple adapter. And I also have a loose set of changes in Kubernetes itself. And they don't seem like they're that big, but I'm just not experienced in developing inside of Kubernetes. I don't really know the larger impact of something like this.
when do you have a link? Or is that the poll? That poll's probably linked from your other poll for what you're hitting in KK.
Yes, if you scroll down on this issue, actually, I thought I commented earlier, but I just did it before the meeting. I've got.
Yeah, my first thought is, if it's possible, it'd be nice if you could leave that package with the interface intact and just extract the general stuff and like basically make this package glue the general thing along with the adapter together. That way the interface in KK doesn't have to change at all. If the changes to KK are small, then maybe that's okay. Refresh my memory. Do we version kube-openapi correctly? I think we might.
I think it looks like it's pulled in as a separate dependency. Not
Well,
sure
yeah, but yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean that we do it correctly. But I think kube-openapi is one of the ones where we try to keep semver, which would make this safer than or more correct, right? Like we could cut a new version and then fix KK when we upgrade to that new version.
Yeah. I think the tricky part here is that there are no interfaces exposed by Go RESTful. It's the concrete type. So any change is going to have to be changed in the dependent.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, sometimes there's various ways around that.
Yeah. I guess what we could do is add a new method that does exactly the same thing, but takes an interface instead, and just continue kind of bundling that.
Yeah, you could do a type assertion, which is super gross, but yeah, I guess I would say I don't object to this, and in fact, upgrading Go RESTful has been a long-standing request. It's just challenging to do the review. That was blocked on me, and I think the person sending that PR got fed up with my slow review latency and abandoned it.
The KK change does look. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say the KK change does look fairly constrained. The adapter looks formulaic, so I think this is a lot smaller than trying to updating the Go RESTful. So it looks potentially possible. How about we go that far? So
yeah,
are you worried about breaking consumers of kube-openapi, Daniel?
Yeah, I think if we're, I think we should probably just cut a new version of kube-openapi, and people can move over at their leisure. Yeah, I definitely don't object to this in principle. It's just it's not necessarily a high priority. So easy to review small PRs probably will get looked at, and hard to review big ones will probably get sorted lower down in the stack.
Have we ever had a V2 dependency that we created in Kube? Just thinking through the semver aspect that you mentioned.
I think are we doing minor versions on the structured merge diff library, or is that major versions? I can't remember. Joe
If we're worried
remembers.
about breaking people, doesn't GoMod still pull the latest minor?
Yeah, we shouldn't.
Yeah, GoMod's going to pick something for you for whatever major you asked for. I don't remember if we did it with OpenAPI. I know we did it with SMD. I think we were trying, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, let me double check. SMD real quick.
That one we definitely do Semver on, and we have multiple major versions that you can swap between.
Yes, we're up to V4 on SMD, and that seems to be working okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
works.
think
You can do it.
I don't think I see that on OpenAPI, but okay, if we know how to do it already.
We might not have it. Yeah, the mechanism works.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like OpenAPI has just been minor versions, but maybe it's time to cut a major version.
Yeah.
So if I were to open a pull request against kube-openapi, I could tag you, Daniel, and David, and then we could discuss
Also
where it goes. Or
include me and Antoine A. Police.
Okay.
If you know what you know, I can drop them on, and we can help make sure that we get this major versioning done the same way that we did it in the other project, so that you can make a breaking change and we can roll that out in a controlled way.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love for us to get into the habit of using Semver correctly.
I was going to say that related to this, interestingly, Austin came to our one of our bug triage meetings. You know, this is a different repo, it's not KK, so we it didn't appear in our filters, but I think, you know, from the conversation we own this. So I asked him to, you know, tag API Machinery so we see them, but I don't know if this is a, you know, a different problem that we have to solve, and also if there are others like this one that are, you know, not in our filters.
Yeah, it's a long-standing defect in our bug triage. Some of our repos say to not file issues there and file them in main KK, but not all of them do consistently. I think kube-openapi we should probably include in our triage.
Yeah, well, I guess
somehow.
The problem would be solved if API Machinery gets tagged automatically, but it doesn't. So well, okay, something else for our leadership to do this to fix. But I wanted to bring it up here. Okay, very good. Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, we go to our favorite topic, the Finalizers and Liens. Masaki, you're up.
Yes. As a part of discussion on liens, we have been discussing whether making finalizer and liens subresource is needed. Due to the concern whether we can make these fields subresource later, it became a blocker for adding lien field. And in the structure recently, we've got an interesting use case for subresourcing. As commented there, the use case is disallowing my controller to write to its CRD except for status subresource, but allow it to update finalizer liens. And I think that it will be a good reason to provide separate RBAC to the spec and finalizers or liens. And actually, Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say for myself, I was the one fighting against this, but I think I was convinced mostly by if we add it at the beginning, then it's possible to integrate a controller with it in the right way. And like ideally, you want your controller to have the smallest permission possible. So reluctantly, I agree that it's probably good if we start out with a subresource that lets you write the liens.
Yeah, and so I started to investigate whether we can make finalizer a subresource, and I've added a comment just right below. Oh, could you go up again? Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're talking about, did you mean to say you you adjusted your PR to create a sub-resource for liens, or did you create a sub-resource for finalizers?
Sub-resource for finalizer.
Okay. I wasn't trying to make that something you had to do as part of liens.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I was.
Oh yeah.
That what I said made sense in the context of liens, and that you didn't think I wanted to change to finalizers as a requirement. I do want to change to finalizers, but not as a requirement for this.
Oh, could you repeat it again, please?
I just wanted to make sure that you understood I was interested in having the sub-resource for liens so that we could build the controllers, correctly from the start. But I didn't want to try to gate your liens on changing the way finalizers worked. I would also separately like to do that, but I don't see it as blocking on this PR.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, I've implemented a prototype of making finalizer sub-resource just below these comments. Could you scroll down? Yeah, this one.
That's
yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. Actually, it just. Could you go to? Yeah. Could you go back? Yeah. It's a last comment. Yeah. No.
I think finalizers are actually going to be slightly more tricky than liens because at least namespaces already have a finalize sub-resource, I believe. So I think we can do.
Yes, this comment.
We should figure out exactly how we want the sub-resource to work. Do it right in liens, and then figure out how to make finalizer follow the same pattern. Does that sound right to you, David?
It does. I do suspect liens will be a little bit simpler. Yeah.
Actually, I made another approach to making finalizer a sub-resource. I just add a new knob to access to finalizer as a sub-resource. So in this prototype, I made config maps / finalizer to an endpoint to just allow modifying the config map only finalizer field. So it's just allow touching the finalizer field of any resources.
Yeah, I think the important thing in this meeting is just to agree that we want the sub-resource, and we can work out the details in code review.
Yeah.
One detail we might want to discuss here is what should the content of the sub-resource be? For example, we could have it serve only metadata, since that's where the liens or finalizer fields will be. There's no need to include spec or status. Or we could follow the pattern that we have for the status sub-resource, in which we return the entire object, even though you can only edit one part of it.
I think there
I don't know
is
if David has an. Yeah, I don't know if David has an opinion. My opinion is it would be handy if it was just metadata.
I agree, because that would make it easier to be universal, right? You'd be able to write something that would be able to understand and decode the response. Interestingly, I think that means you'd be able to encode it as proto from a CRD endpoint or from a CR endpoint, which I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. That's interesting.
Actually, I looked at the ephemeral container code, and recently it was changed to not have a actual object. Instead, it just made an endpoint to ephemeral container. So is it okay to not creating the finalizer object or lien object as a sub-resource and making our endpoint for finalizer or sub-resource?
If I understood what you're asking, yeah, we don't need a new API object. We can just serve metadata.
Okay. Yeah.
So is the KEP ready for another pass? I think if I don't think there's any more open disagreements about how this should work. So
can we recap what we decided on permissions? I think we decided that anyone would be able to choose to ignore the lien when issuing a delete. Is that where we landed on that? And is everyone here happy with it? And if not, I guess, or if you're not sure, give people a little bit of time to comment.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot. I pinged a bunch of threads on mailing lists to get people to come have this deletion protection discussion here. Some people are of the opinion that a lien should break a CI/CD system, and some people are of the opinion that a lien should not break a CI/CD system. One way I thought of doing that is we could have a permission, like we could distinguish between like forcibly breaking it, or maybe we could give people a RBAC permission, or invent an RBAC permission that let people ignore liens by default without doing anything, because some of the people who don't want this to ever break a CI/CD system want to also not have to modify their CI/CD system to make it force. I personally think that the whole point of a lien is that it should break your CI/CD system, but other people disagree.
So I think you're talking about two distinct things. One is by default, are liens honored, or by default, liens not honored? And I think the other is, can any client with delete powers decide to ignore the lien? And I think those are two different decisions.
Kind of. I think like, should liens be honored by default? I think that's yes, but maybe there's some clients where people want a different default.
That's an interesting thought. So there is a default, and then there's a default for a particular, like there's two defaults.
Yeah.
I am of the opinion that the point of a lien is to break those clients that have not considered whether they should explicitly ignore the lien, right? Like it's kind of an I probably know better than you flag.
So I agree with that. Maybe we can come up with an easy way to like upgrade so people don't have to change their CI/CD system, but they can always make it force delete. I'm not thinking of anything off the top of my head, but maybe somebody can.
We don't have any server-side defaults that follow a particular client today.
No. Like we could do something that's very very gross, like maybe a environment variable that the client listens to, and then our client can, if that is set, our default Go client could set a delete flag. I guess this wouldn't help people who are not using the default. We could add an option in kubeconfig files if people have written their CI/CD system to use kube control. We could add a please always force delete. It's like the most dangerous option in the world. Please always force delete option in your kubeconfig file. That would make kubecontrol automatically clobber the liens. It sounds terrible to me, but maybe if people are careful how they use it.
That's creative.
We can make an environment variable that kubecontrol pays attention to. That's slightly more ephemeral than something in your kubeconfig file.
Could we make a claim that clients need to have some sort of handling for failed deletes already? And thus, whatever system is in place to handle failed deletes today will be the system that they use to recognize that their deletes are failing.
Yeah, I mean, what could cause a delete to fail today? You could have a permission error. I mean, if there's finalizers or grace period or something, that doesn't make the delete fail. That means that the object is just still there until it's really deleted sometime later.
You could have any sort of custom admission plugin that chooses to stop it.
That's true. Do people commonly do that?
Across all resources, I'm not sure. I know that I've coded some for particular resources.
Do any of the built-in resources do that? Like what are the complicated ones? PVCs and PVs do. If those don't monkey with the delete calls, then probably there's nothing that does it.
I don't think they do. Well, there might be an admission plugin that does it. There might be like a protect something. I think there's a PVC protect admission. Let me see. At any rate, I'm not sure that particular the permissions being such that anyone can ignore a lien, regardless of what the default is. That also seems like a significant decision point.
All right, so sounds like we can update the KEP to include the sub-resource. And well, what if, just to latch in some progress, what if we put some big unresolved sections around the things that we've just been talking about, so that we can merge something and focus the conversation on just the things that are left?
That'll work for me.
Does that make sense, Masaki?
Yes. And actually, we in the current KEP, we already have the force delete option that is only allowed to some user or group. And if the user is allowed to change their client code, then they may be able to specify the force delete options. So that is one of the alternatives for their workaround.
Yeah. And what I was hearing from at least one person is that they don't want to have to edit the CI/CD system code or recompile it. But I think if we can narrow down the remaining unanswered items to like just that, then I don't know, I can say something on Twitter or something and see if we can get some more detailed feedback. I don't know if we should adjust the design for just one person. So it'd be good to have like a few people say they want that.
Okay, so let me add a section that describes the feedback from people and the current status for that.
Yeah, people just put in markers in the KEP, like unresolved or something like that, to mark that that's what's blocking the status from going to implementable or whatever.
I had a question from a client side point of view. liens are still optional, meaning that you have to opt in into actually using it. Why then we are worried on the client side that we should have the either force option or an option to say, well, just ignore liens and just continue a hammer sort of approach if a user can easily add or remove it.
The thing is, they're opt-in from the perspective of nothing will create them by default, but the person putting them on an object is quite possibly not the same person as like the one who's running the CI/CD system. So from the CI/CD system's perspective, these things might just show up. And the other thought is like this particular cap doesn't include any automated use, and we should probably think carefully before we add automated use. But in the near future, after this gets added, people will be able to write controllers that automatically place these liens on things. So it may not be quite as opt-in as it seems at first.
If I remember from earlier versions of the same cap that I read a couple weeks ago, there was also mention of adding a delete option for the force. So we would just need to make sure that kubectl also sets that particular option properly when using the force.
Right.
In which case we would basically say that kubectl force, which already is there, is the hammer that you can always use.
I don't know if force does that. I think I'd want to look and see whether force does that before I say.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea.
It's a tricky because currently
I think force does something else right now.
There is a combination of force and a grace period, and depending on the combination and the value for each of them, it does it either a hammer or a hammer with a delay or a third. I can't remember specifically. And I've been meaning to clean that bit so that it is easier to grasp. Because having
that's a really nice way of handling the problem for kube control if it makes sense to add this to the force command, because presumably people already do this for their CI/CD systems. It doesn't help people who have like written an API level integration with the language, like they're not shelling out to kube control. It wouldn't necessarily help those people because there's no current deletion force option in the deletion options. But that could definitely still be helpful. Yeah, okay. Fede, looks like you snuck something onto the agenda just now. Should we go on?
Yes. I just wanted to make sure Masaki had enough. So I think we are done. I tried to capture, the 2 action items, and I don't want to hold anybody more than what is needed. Just wanted to sneak that not this Friday after next is Kubecon North America. We are having a session. It's a deep dive session for API Machinery. So Joe and Abu from the SIG are going to be talking about server-side apply for controllers and lessons learned on API priority and fairness. It's a recorded session, the presentations, but we are going to be live, answering questions and, covering whatever is needed. So everybody, I guess, is invited if you register. I don't know how it works exactly, but it's going to be public afterwards. So yeah, just wanted to say that. That's all we had for today. Anything else that we are missing? If not, we can dismiss everybody. Sounds good? Very good. Thank you for your participation, and we'll see you hopefully in 2 weeks. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good week.
Sounds good. See ya. Bye.
See ya.